Welcome to the weekend worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual worship service. We are so fortunate that even in these times, we can still gather on Sunday or maybe Saturday from our laptop or smartphone and celebrate each other and celebrate our values and principles. I just want to give you a couple of quick announcements before we begin our worship service. They are both related to our special service for Sunday, March 7th. That's Celebration Sunday, the official kickoff of our annual pledge campaign, and a chance for our congregation to really celebrate ourselves, the unique place that we hold in the Salt Lake community, the fine work that we do here, and how to keep it going. The theme for this year is Building for Our Future. Now, you should have already received a pledge packet in the mail. If you haven't yet, please do reach out to our administrative assistant, Stephanie Park, and she can make sure that you get one. On March 7th, we will have a live worship service starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. You can tune in to the service by using the same coffee hour Zoom link that's available every Sunday. Immediately following the service, there will be a brief congregational meeting. The board has an important issue of concern to the congregation that will require a congregational vote. Please watch your Torch email for the details on that issue, and you'll receive a frequently asked questions document that explains the topic of the vote. Then, right after that vote, we'll have a special coffee hour to discuss the pledge campaign, and in particular, we want to share some highlights of next year's budget with you. As you know, our congregation is not only coming out of a difficult period, as are all faith communities due to the pandemic, but we are facing some unique challenges in the next few years as we transition to a new minister. The finance committee of our congregation has been hard at work preparing a budget that addresses these challenges, and you'll get a chance on March 7th to see the first glimpses of the vision of the future that we are building together. You don't want to miss it. And now, let us begin our worship service by lighting the chalice, a flame that represents our free faith and the promises we make to each other in community. This week we light it with these words by Paul Sprecher. We light this chalice in memory of the courage of those who have struggled for freedom, the persistence of those who've struggled for justice, and the love of those who've built beloved communities to carry on the light of hope.
The theme for religious education this past month has been beloved community. Often, when we talk about community, we're thinking of the people close to us, either geographically or socially. The idea of beloved community, however, asks us to think bigger. Who are the people we need to include in our idea of community, our beloved community, that may not look like us or have the same faith or values? Centering the idea of equity and justice for all, I have a book to share with you today. The book is entitled All Are Welcome.
All Are Welcome by Alexandra Penfold, illustrated by Suzanne Kaufman. Pencils sharpened in their case. Bells are ringing, let's make haste. School's beginning, dreams to chase. All are welcome here. No matter how you start your day, what you wear when you play. Or if you come from far away, all are welcome here. In our classroom, safe and sound, fears are lost and hope is found. Raise your hand, we'll go around. All are welcome here. Gather now, let's all take part. We'll play the music, we'll make art. We'll share stories from the heart. All are welcome here. Time for lunch, what a spread! A dozen different kinds of bread. Pass it around till everyone's fed. All are welcome here. Open doors, rush outside. We will swing, we will slide. We'll have fun side by side. All are welcome here. We're part of a community. Our strength is our diversity. A shelter from adversity. All are welcome here. We will learn from each other. Special talents we'll uncover. There's a big world to discover. All are welcome here. So much to learn, so much to do. And when the busy day is through, can't wait to come back, start anew. All are welcome here. Head home to get some rest and greet tomorrow ready and fresh. Our time together is the best. All are welcome here. You have a place here. You have a space here. You are welcome here.
The Reverend Dr. Bill Schultz, past president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and of Amnesty International, wrote in a speech to a gathering of ministers some 15 years ago about what torture had taught him about human nature and ministry. He spoke of the awful history of torture, the regimes with which he had bargained on behalf of amnesty, and the victims of torture he had met himself, and how these experiences made him reflect on his own humanity and on our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In his remarks, Schultz said that in his years with Amnesty International, he interviewed dozens of victims of torture and hundreds of witnesses, and had rarely, if ever, come across a testimony that it was faith in God that saw them through the night. Sometimes human beings inflict pain on each other, Schultz recalls, that is so intense that it obliterates the very face of God. This is no slam on the concept of God, he writes. It is merely an acknowledgement that God's absence, true absence, is as real a phenomenon as God's immanence. As we enter together into a spirit of prayer and meditation, we hold this truth, this deeply uncomfortable truth in our minds, and we ask ourselves who or what we might pray to in a world in which torture, terror, and evil reside and are allowed to persist. We open the door at the end of the hall in our hearts, the one we rarely dare to peek behind, the one locking away the emptiness of despair, and take a brief glimpse at that emptiness. We give ourselves permission to rage at God, to be furious with God for the unbearable suffering that exists in some corners of the world. Where are you, God? Where have you gone and left your people all alone? Or we grieve and rage that there never was a God that could save us from ourselves, that there never was a place without suffering that there are questions we will never be able to answer. Then we turn again, grateful for a place in our hearts to store that rage and grief. And we face each other, our fellow human beings, each one of us capable of cruelty and meanness, each one of us capable of kindness and selflessness, each one of us capable of ignorance and apathy. We search each and every human face for the possibility of God, what we might call God, what we might call goodness or salvation. When the stars and the whirlwind and the roiling seas are silent, what choice do we have but to find what we hope for in each other? And we search each other for the courage to be goodness and to be salvation for this world, for each other, to be kindness and selflessness, to not look away from suffering, but rather to move toward it with the intention to witness it and relieve it however we can. And we resolve, praying to whatever or whomever is listening, to transform our apathy into action, our despair into fierce courage, our shadows into brilliant light, shining justice onto the world. Amen.
It's my pleasure as well to welcome you to our worship service at the First Unitarian Church. We're going to take on a pretty heavy topic today, namely human rights. And we probably feel pretty comfortable in that area. Yeah, we know what human rights are and what they're for, but I think before the service is through, we might have perhaps a different perspective about what human rights really mean. I'd like to begin by saying that our nation is painfully divided, but that's old news. How old will probably not surprise many of you. Parallels are often drawn between what we experience today and the enmity felt between the Union and the Confederacy during the Civil War. But our national divide goes back even further than that. Has there ever been a time when Americans were not contentious about their views on what America should ideally look like? It seems to boil down to a clash over how best to understand roles and responsibilities in a culturally diverse nation. I'm not sure we can ever reach agreement or even find consensus. But it seems to me we're missing, or perhaps better yet, talking past each other across the divide, failing to recognize the actual source of all this discord. Now, we might consider race as a primary issue. And when we go back 400 years to when the African slave trade was brought to the shores of Virginia in 1619, we can really see how white power structures got firmly entrenched in the American culture. Add to that the systematic expulsion of indigenous people and the long history of excluding virtually all non-white people from citizenship. And then we can understand how all that flows into today's issues like Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, building a wall along our southern border. And in fact, what we're facing now is even a renewed and more vigorous campaign to suppress voters in minority neighborhoods. And so there's really a consistent thread throughout the centuries whereby white Americans somehow feel this existential threat from a non-white population. Clearly, the danger stems from a conceived erosion of power, this power held over people of color. The manner in which white Americans deal with the threat of equality just overwhelming society is by restricting the rights of a non-white population. That's what we seek to do. There's a lot of fear in this equality, and so there is this concerted effort to actually restrict the rights of non-white people. And thus, white people maintain their comfortable status quo in society and ensure their good fortunes as well as their children's well into the future. So let's take a hard look at human rights this morning. The elimination of rights as a function of white supremacy has always been buried in much U.S. history. An honest reckoning would reveal that this concept of white power has saturated public culture and political governance from the KKK to Jim Crow, from American imperialism to the embrace of eugenics, from the back of the bus to the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. And yet, the white power structure of our nation, as we well know, is not simply about race. It also includes gender and sexuality. It's not easy when half the country clings to a perspective that supports patriarchy, heteronormative behavior, and that catchphrase, that meaningless catchphrase, family values, despite all its hypocrisies. This past year alone has reminded us yet again of society unraveling when ideologies clash in the streets over the meaning of Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, or basically, what does matter in America today? And then there are certain triggers, like affirmative action, equal opportunity initiatives, feminism, trans, or even you can bring in climate change, universal health care, masks, multiculturalism, all contesting the need to widen the circle of care. And that's what rights are all about, widening the circle of care. I know it seems startling to us that instead of welcoming a more just system of government that honors the rights of all its citizens, about half the country is committed instead to restricting diverse populations from access to the good American life. Progressives, on the other hand, somehow, well, how do I say this? They somehow feel it in their bones, or they just know it in their conscience, that all people, they'll insist, all people are entitled to a quality life simply because they're human. Now, I want to raise the possibility that our nation's divide, historically and presently, is at its core all about human rights and what it means to coexist with one another in community. As Unitarian Universalists, we post our vision of a just society front and center. Our first UU principle proclaims, "We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people." And we have, I think, that memorized. We teach it to our kids. We're proud of it. That's kind of what we stand behind. But we need to understand that this principle, our number one principle, is really an article of faith. How do we ever prove that everyone is born with inherent worth and dignity? It is what we simply believe to be true. As something resembling proof, we may want to point to the preamble of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says, and I quote, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." And then it continues in Article 1, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are all endowed with reason and conscience." Well, you and I, and about half our nation, nod in agreement that all people are entitled to dignity and equal treatment as simply foundational for a just and peaceful world. We are all born with inherent human rights. But now, an uncomfortable question. How do we know that? Okay? How do we know that to be true? Well, progressives will argue, hey, come on, it's a no-brainer. How else can we imagine a good society other than by protecting the dignity and rights of all people who live in it? But we can only assume to know what makes for a good society. There is no factual standard manual that instructs people how to assemble, how to put together a good society. We just seem to feel what is right in terms of what every person we believe is entitled to, simply by being a human being. How much, however, can we squeeze in under the human rights umbrella? Are we bound to include, then, sufficient food for everyone, water, housing, health care, economic opportunity? Indeed, why not include the pursuit of happiness as a human right? And the funny thing is, we'd probably say yes. We want to do just that. But we can't point to anything tangible that commands beyond any doubt the rights a society must include for its citizens. For us, for all progressives, it's a matter of faith. It's only a matter of faith that desperately wants to impose human rights on society because that's our vision of what a good society should look like. Where we currently find more children living below the poverty line than ever before, mass incarceration, police brutality, progressives feel deeply motivated to reject all forms of discrimination, assure due process for everyone, and above all, protect our children. Aren't these the minimal requirements for a good society? But human rights can only begin to flourish once the duties and obligations among those with power in society are made clear towards those whose lives are affected by their decisions. There's no getting around the fact that progressives feel they must place constraints upon the powerful. Justice reform, civilian review boards to monitor police, watchdogs for financial institutions, voter registration drives, early mail-in ballots, even impeaching a president twice for an abuse of power. So why are we inescapably stuck in this divide? Well, we can look at it this way. We've got half the country telling the other half of the country that they have an obligation. Can you imagine that? Hey, you have an obligation to ensure the rights and dignity of everyone so that we can create a good society. We're telling people who won't even wear a mask to protect, they don't want to wear a mask to protect their neighbors from the spread of COVID-19. We're telling them that they are obligated to create a good society according to our interpretation of what a good society means. We, in turn, mock their evangelical interpretation of Christianity. We chide them for their selfish preoccupation with greed. We ridicule them for all their conspiracy theories. And yet we progressives stand on no firm foundation. We offer no scientific proof, reveal no hard evidence that qualifies us as experts on a good society. So what do? We point to Scripture. It never fails to astound me that suddenly non-church-going progressives become these biblical scholars. Well, that's crazy. So what we do is we point to the Hebrew tradition that says that all human beings are made in God's image, after God's likeness. And this means that any affront to human dignity is an affront to God. And then progressives resort to Jesus, who warns, "What you do to the least of these, you do unto me." Isn't the right wing supposed to follow Jesus? I mean, when we tell them what Jesus said, that ought to suffice, right? I mean, hey, you're Christians, this is what Jesus said, go do it. But these Judeo-Christian hallmarks of ensuring dignity for all doesn't really convince anyone. Religious agreement? Forget it. I mean, does anyone really think that Christians could ever agree on what God requires of them? And don't forget, we've got people like Newt Gingrich, Bill Moyers, Clinton, Jimmy Carter,
William Barber II, not only claiming to be Christians, but they all stake their claims on being Baptists. Obviously, they all have their own individual versions. One of my favorite examples of the inability of Christians really coming into any kind of uniform belief is remembering the old second century sect, the old Christian sect, which was known as the Montanists. They fervently believed that only those who ate a steady diet of radishes would have a chance of entering the kingdom of God. Well, there you have it. Unfortunately, there's way too much variation in interpreting Christianity that to rely on the Bible, ostensibly God's word, is simply untenable. So progressives then look to some powerful philosophers as proof. That's proof. John Rawls, in his great book, The Laws of Peoples, makes, I think, a wonderful argument that justice is derived from notions of fairness that we would select if we had no idea ahead of time where we would end up in a society in terms of our class position, natural assets, intelligence, strength, and other factors. Rawls used that premise, well, kind of as a springboard into what he thought embodied fairness, including equality of opportunity, distribution of income, and health care for all. And honestly, the only response to that is saying, well, thank you, Professor Rawls. Thank you for your opinion. That's nice. One of my personal favorites is Martha Nussbaum, who is professor at the University of Chicago. She said that people are entitled to freedom. That's what constitutes a good society. People who are free. Freedom to acquire an adequate education, freedom to produce self-expressive works, the option to participate in political life, property ownership. It goes on and on and on, but, thank you, Professor, for your opinion. How nice. But the other side of the divide faces the same dilemma. Richard Rorty, a philosophy professor at the University of Virginia, argues that every person feels they are worthy of dignity. Every person has experienced humiliation. Every person knows what pain is. And therefore, he concludes, therefore it's up to the conservative right to prove that not all people are like them. You know, if they want to deny that others have feelings and hopes and experience pain and humiliation and indignity like they do, prove it. Prove that there are different categories of people. Now, slave owners have tried to do that. The Nazis tried to do that. Eugenics has tried to do that. White supremacy groups of all stripes have tried to do that. But despite their assertion, they never provided anything even remotely resembling scientific proof. I strongly believe that the fundamental issue that divides our nation pertains to human rights. And so to parse it even further, the issue could be summed up as, are human rights something that we can assume to have automatically, that from the moment of our birth we are endowed with inalienable rights simply as human beings? Or Do rights need to be earned and distributed by those who wield power? Are rights given to us by virtue of our place in society? And who decides that? So if we dismiss the small percentage of people at the far extremes of both the right and left political spectrum, I wonder, out loud, if we might have a better chance of coming together as a nation if we seriously look at human rights. Looking at human rights now, not as opinion, not as a stipulation from God, but as trying to reach consensus on, well, what does a good society actually look like? What needs to happen? And here we might get some pragmatic advice from the UN Human Rights Declaration, which also asks, what are the consequences when human rights are denied? And the Declaration posits that history reveals to us quite clearly throughout the international community that disregard for human rights, and I quote, resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of humankind. And then it goes on. Without human rights, human beings will be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression. Rights are essential to promote the development of friendly relations, civility, deter oppression, foster stability, and encourage peaceful interactions. And so I want to ask everyone, I want to ask people on both sides now, are these not the characteristics we seek in a good society? Civility, stability, and peace. But the most important point I'm striving for is recognition from both sides that despite their tenacious commitment to their respective views of what society ought to look like, they need to acknowledge that their position cannot be proven. It's a matter of faith on both sides. No one stands on firm ground. Now, it would take more than an ounce of humility to admit that no hard evidence supports the case on either side of the divide. But that's exactly what we need. Approaching the divide with less belligerence and a lot more humility. And it's really all about figuring out what society ought to look like. What's the role of human rights? What role does human rights play when we look at the full composition of society? Now, both sides would ultimately admit there is no evidence to support their strident views. And so, stop for a moment, reflect deeply. It's time to get together, isn't it? It's time to get together to figure it out. What makes a good society? So be it.